The smell hit me first. That stale, burned coffee smell from the urn in the corner of the green room, the kind that doesn't smell like coffee anymore, but like the memory of coffee, like the ghost of something that used to be good and had been sitting there too long and had given up. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage with the engine off, not ready to go inside yet, just sitting there with my hands on the steering wheel and the radio off and the windows up, and I caught that smell coming through the air vents even though my windows were closed, and I was 3 levels below the building. It was coming from the building above me. It was coming from that room. And I was back there again before I could stop it, before I could do anything to keep from being pulled back into that morning when everything changed, that morning I've been trying to forget ever since. And I realized I had never told anyone what I heard that day. You want to hear it? Okay, I'll tell it. I'm a sound engineer, or I was. I worked for a network, one of the big ones, and I was on the crew for that event. I've been doing this work for years, setting up audio feeds, monitoring levels, making sure the sound is clean for the broadcast, and you learn things doing this work. You learn how to hear not just what's being said, but what's happening underneath what's being said. You learn to hear the spaces between words. You learn to hear when someone's voice changes shape even though the words stay the same. You learn to hear the things that aren't on the record, the things that don't make it into the broadcast because the microphones aren't pointed the right way, or the room is too big, or the person speaking is too quiet. That's what happened that day. I heard things I wasn't supposed to hear, and I've been sitting with those sounds in my head ever since, turning them over, trying to figure out what they meant, trying to decide if they meant anything at all or if I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I heard some fragments of a conversation, and I made more of it than it was. But I don't think that's what happened. I don't think I made it up. I think what I heard was real and it mattered and nobody else knows about it except me and the people who were in that room, and they're not talking. So I'm going to talk. I'm going to tell you what happened because someone asked me and I've been holding on to it for too long, and I need to put it somewhere where it can stop taking up space inside my head. The smell of the coffee. I keep coming back to that smell. I was in the green room that day and the coffee urn was in the corner and it had been sitting there all morning and it had that smell, that flat, burned smell, and I remember thinking that no one was going to drink that coffee. It was just there for show, just there to make the room look like a place where important things happened, and important people drank coffee from urns while important things were happening around them. And I was right. No one drank it. No one even went near it. It just sat there in the corner being useless and producing that smell, and the smell was the first thing that told me something was wrong with this room. Not wrong like broken, wrong like staged, wrong like someone had set it up to look like something it wasn't. There's something I need to tell you early on, a question someone asked me that morning on the way into the building. I was carrying my equipment case and my headset and I was walking through the back corridor toward the green room and someone stopped me. Someone who was supposed to be in the room that day. Someone whose name I knew but whose face I had only seen in pictures. They asked me a question about the microphones. Not a technical question, something simpler than that. Something about whether the mics would pick up everything or just the people at the table. I gave an answer. I don't even remember what I said. But I remember that they asked, and I remember that I answered, and I remember thinking at the time that the question was strange. Not the question itself, but the way they asked it, like they already knew the answer, like they were testing me, like the answer mattered more than I understood it to matter. I would find out later why that mattered. I would think about that question for years afterward, turning it over, wondering what they were really asking when they asked it. Also that morning, I was told to stay near the technical table during the session, not to move around, not to go into the main room unless I was called. I was told to stay in the green room and monitor the audio feeds and keep my headphones on. This was unusual. Usually I would be in the main room with the rest of the crew, making adjustments, checking levels, being where the action was. But this time I was told to stay in the green room. I didn't ask why. I was low on the ladder. You don't ask why when you're low on the ladder. You do. What you're told, and you hope it doesn't mean something bad is coming. You hope it means something good is coming, and they just don't trust you with the good thing yet. That's what I was hoping. I was hoping it meant something good. The green room was smaller than I expected. I've been in a lot of green rooms over the years, press gaggles, formal events, campaign events, and they are usually bigger than you think they'll be, with enough room for the equipment and the staff and still some space left over for people to move around without bumping into each other. This one was tight. It felt like they had taken a regular office conference room and called it a green room because that was the word that fit the occasion. There was a table in the middle with a black cloth on it, And there were chairs around it. 4 chairs, maybe 5. The kind of chairs that look comfortable until you sit in them and realize they were designed for looks, not comfort. And there was a side table against the wall with the coffee urn on it. And there was a small sound board near the door where I was supposed to set up my equipment. The room smelled like coffee and like the cleaning solution they used on the carpet, and like something else underneath both of those, something I couldn't name but that I kept noticing every time I took a breath. It was the smell of a room that had been recently cleaned and recently used, and was now waiting to be used again. I need to tell you about the lights. The overhead lights were the kind that buzz. Not loudly, you wouldn't notice it if you weren't listening for it, but I was listening for it because I always listen for it. It's one of the things a sound engineer does. You listen for the noises that shouldn't be there. You listen for the hum and the crackle and the things that will show up on the recording if you don't catch them in time. And these lights buzzed. A low, steady hum that sat just under the threshold of most people's awareness. I could hear it. It was the first thing I heard when I walked in before I even set down my equipment case. That hum, that buzz, I kept hearing it all morning. I kept hearing it even when I put my headphones on and the headphones were supposed to be blocking everything else out. The buzz was still there underneath, like a frequency I couldn't tune out, like a sound that had attached itself to the room and wasn't going to let go. And I should tell you about the door that led from the green room into the main event space. It was supposed to be closed during the session. That was part of the instruction I was given. Keep the door closed. Keep the green room separate from the main room. Don't let the audio bleed through. That's what I was supposed to do. Keep the door closed and keep the sound where it was supposed to be and make sure the recording was clean and everything was separate and contained. The door had a gap at the bottom. A small one, maybe half an inch, where the carpet met the bottom of the door and the seal wasn't quite complete. I noticed it when I first walked in. I knelt down and looked at it and thought about telling someone, thought about asking for some kind of buffer or weather stripping to stop the sound from leaking through. But I didn't. I was low on the ladder. I didn't want to make trouble. I didn't want to be the person who noticed problems instead of solving them. I thought it would be fine. I thought the sound would stay where it was supposed to stay, and the gap would just be a gap, and nobody would ever know it was there. I was wrong about that. I've been wrong about a lot of things in my career, but I've never been as wrong as I was about that door. Here's what I heard. Here's what I need to tell you about. I was in the green room with my headphones on, monitoring the audio feeds from the main room, and through the door with the gap at the bottom, I heard things I wasn't supposed to hear. Things the cameras didn't catch. Things the microphones in the main room didn't pick up clearly because they were pointed the other way, at the people at the table, and the sound coming through the door was just below the threshold of what the main room mics were designed to catch. They were too far away from the door. They were aimed at the table. They were missing everything that was happening in the space around the table, everything that was in the air but not being recorded. But I had my headphones on, and I was close to the door, and the gap at the bottom was letting things through. The low things, the bass end of the conversation, the sounds that travel through walls and floors and doors because they are too big to be stopped by anything smaller than a brick wall. I heard those. I heard all of those. I want you to stay with me through this because this is the part I keep coming back to. This is the part that matters, and I almost didn't tell it. I almost said the story was about what I saw in the main room and left it, I almost decided that what I heard in the green room was just bleed-through, just leakage, just the sound of something happening in the next room that I wasn't supposed to be part of. But I'm not going to do that to you. You came here to hear what really happened, and what really happened started with what I heard in the green room. It started with the gap at the bottom of the door. It started with the coffee smell and the buzz of the lights and the headphones over my ears. It started with me being in the wrong place at exactly the right time. The main room was set up for a formal exchange. I couldn't see it from where I was sitting, but I knew what it looked like because I've seen 100 rooms like it. A table in the middle covered with a dark cloth, chairs on both sides arranged to face each other. Cameras in the corners, 3 of them maybe 4, pointed at the table and the people who would be sitting there. Lights pointed at the table, the kind of lights that make everything look brighter and sharper and more real than it actually is. Press along the walls, standing or sitting depending on how much space was available, holding cameras and microphones and recorders and notebooks. That kind of setup. I knew it was there, and I knew what was happening in it because I could hear it through the door and through my headphones. I could hear the room settling into itself, the way a room does when it knows something important is about to happen, and it is getting ready. He came in first. I knew he was there because I heard his voice before I saw anything on the audio feeds. He was greeting someone, a staff person maybe, or a protocol officer, someone whose job it was to be there and make sure everything was in order. His voice was calm, low, the kind of voice that fills a room without seeming to try, the kind of voice you hear and immediately feel like everything is under control even if nothing is. He said something that I couldn't quite make out. It was too quiet, too far from the microphones, and then he sat down. I heard the chair scrape against the floor. I heard him settle into it. I heard him adjust something, maybe the microphone in front of him, maybe his papers. I couldn't tell exactly, but I heard it. I heard all of it. The scrape of the chair, the settling of his weight, the small sounds of a person getting ready to sit in a chair and stay there for a while. Then the other one came in. I heard her too, footsteps first. Then the sound of the door opening in the main room. Then her voice answering a question from someone. Her voice was different, not worse, not better, just different. It had a different texture, higher, sharper, like something that was trying very hard to be smooth and was only half succeeding, like a surface that had been polished but still had some rough spots underneath. I listened to her voice through my headphones and through the door, and I thought about the question that had been asked of me that morning, the one about whether the microphones would pick up everything or just the people at the table. And I remember thinking this clearly, I thought, they want to know if everything will be captured. They want to know if there will be a complete record of what happens in there. They want to know what the microphones will miss. And then I heard something that made me stop breathing for a second. Here's the first thing, the first tell, the thing I heard that the cameras didn't catch, the thing that told me something was happening in that room that was different from what the broadcast would show. She took a sip of water, at the wrong moment. I know it was the wrong moment because I know what the rhythm of a conversation like that sounds like. I've monitored enough of these events to know when someone is about to speak, and when someone is in the middle of speaking, and when someone is waiting for someone else to finish so they can start. And she took the sip in the gap between sentences, in the pause when everyone was waiting to see who would speak next, and it was too early. It was the pause before the pause. It was the moment when someone reaches for water because they're nervous and they need something to do with their hands and their mouth while they wait to see what happens next. That's what that sip was, and I heard it through the door. I heard the glass touch her lips. I heard the water go down, and I heard the silence that came after, the silence that was different from the silence that came before, because after that sip the silence had a shape to it. It was the silence of someone who had just shown their hand without meaning to. The silence of someone who had revealed that they were holding something they didn't want anyone to see them holding. I almost stopped listening here. I almost took off my headphones and walked into the main room and done my job and left it at that. I almost convinced myself that I had misheard, that it wasn't what I thought it was, that I was reading too much into a sound that was probably nothing. But I didn't. I stayed. And this is the part I'm going to ask you to stay with me through, because this is where it gets real, and this is where I need you to really hear what I'm saying. Because the next part is the part that changed everything for me. The next part is the part I still think about at night when I can't sleep. There was an exchange, words, questions, and answers. I could hear it through the door, but I couldn't hear it clearly because the door was between me and the sound, and the gap at the bottom was letting in the low stuff, the bass end of everything, and filtering out the high end where the words live. So I heard shapes of words, fragments. I heard tone. I heard pace. I heard the rhythm of what was happening even though I couldn't hear every word. It was like listening to music from the next room. You hear the bass line, you hear the drums, you hear the general shape of the melody, but the lyrics are missing and you have to guess at what the song is about based on what you can hear. And I heard this, here's the second tell. I heard a smile in her voice that came 2 seconds after it should have. Here's what I mean. Someone said something. A statement, not a question. A statement that should have gotten a response right away, a response that should have come at the same time as the statement or right after it, in the normal rhythm of a conversation where people are paying attention to each other and responding to what's being said. And she responded, I heard her respond, but the response came late. There was a gap, and in that gap there was a smile. Not a real smile. You can't hear a real smile through a door, you can't see the muscles of someone's face through a wall, but the sound of someone smiling. The way your voice changes shape when you smile. The way the air moves differently through your throat and your mouth when your lips are curved instead of flat. I heard that. I heard her smile before she answered, and the smile came 2 seconds too late, like she was buying time. Like she was deciding whether to smile or not, and then she decided to, and then she answered. And all of that took 2 extra seconds that she didn't have. Seconds that showed up in the rhythm of the conversation like a skip in a record. I heard it and I thought, I remember thinking this, I thought, she's losing. I didn't know the details. I didn't know what they were talking about. I didn't know who was winning and who was losing in any way I could put into words, in any way I could explain to someone who wasn't in that room with their headphones on listening to the sounds bleed through a door. But I heard it. I heard the smile come late, and I heard the sip of water at the wrong moment, and I heard the rhythm of the conversation, and I knew. I knew in my body before I knew it in my mind. I knew that something was happening in that room that was not what it looked like on the surface, not what it would look like on the broadcast, not what the press would write about later. I knew there was a second story happening underneath the first one, and I was the only person who could hear it. And then something happened that I still don't fully understand. Something that I have turned over in my head 1,000 times and still can't make sit still. I heard his voice, the one who came in first, the one who was calm and steady and filling the room without seeming to try. I heard him say something, not to her, not to the room, something to someone near him, a staff person maybe, an aide, someone who was supposed to be there and who was supposed to hear what he was saying. And what he said, I need to tell you exactly what I heard. What he said was a name, just a name. But it was a name I recognized, a name that meant something. A name that wasn't on any of the documents I had seen or any of the briefings I had been given. A name that came out of nowhere and landed in the conversation like a stone dropped into water, sending ripples in every direction. And I was standing in the green room with my headphones on, and I felt the ripples hit me, and I didn't know what they meant. And I heard her reaction. I heard her stop. Not a physical stop, I couldn't see her body from the green room, but an auditory stop. A moment when all the sounds she was making stopped. A moment when the rhythm of her breathing and her speaking and her being in the room changed into something different. Something that told me she had heard the name, and the name had landed somewhere inside her, and she was not ready for it to land there. I heard the silence in the room change. I heard the pace of everything shift, and I knew in that moment that whatever had just happened was the thing that mattered, the thing that the cameras didn't catch, the thing that the microphones in the main room didn't pick up because they were pointed the wrong way, and the N. Aim was said quietly at the wrong time to the wrong person, the thing that was only in the green room, only through the door with the gap at the bottom, only in my headphones. He said a name, and she heard it, and I heard it, and only one of us was supposed to. Here's the thing about the door that was supposed to be closed, the door with the gap at the bottom. I told you I was supposed to stay in the green room and keep the door closed and not let the audio bleed through. But the door was closed and the audio was still bleeding through because of the gap, and there was nothing I could do about it. I couldn't fix the gap. I couldn't make the sound stop coming through. I was just a sound engineer with my headphones on in a room that smelled like burned coffee, and I was hearing things I wasn't supposed to hear. And the door was closed, and the gap was at the bottom, and the buzz of the lights was in my ears, and I couldn't make it stop. I wanted to tell someone. Right then, in that moment, I wanted to stand up and walk out of the green room and find whoever was in charge and say, I heard something. I heard a name. I don't know what it means, but it matters. I think something is happening in there that isn't supposed to happen. I think someone said something they weren't supposed to say, and someone heard something they weren't supposed to hear. But I didn't. I stayed in my chair. I kept my headphones on. I listened. I kept listening because I didn't know what else to do, and because some part of me knew that if I moved, if I left, if I broke the spell of that room in that moment, I would never know what had really happened. I would never know what the name meant, or why she stopped when she heard it, or what was really going on underneath all of it. So I stayed. I listened. I kept listening even though it felt like I was doing something wrong, even though I knew that what I was hearing was not mine to hear. I kept listening, and then I heard something else. Here's the third tell. The thing I heard at the end, the thing that told me the whole story even though I couldn't see any of it. She was still in the room. He was still in the room. The exchange was still going on. I could hear the voices, the rhythm, the back and forth, but underneath all of that, I heard this. I heard her fingernails. I heard the sound of her fingers pressing into the skin of her other hand. I couldn't see it. I was in the green room with the door closed and the gap at the bottom, but I could hear it through the gap at the bottom of the door. The small, soft sound of fingernails digging into skin, a nervous habit. Something she probably didn't know she was doing. Something she would never know anyone heard because the microphones were pointed the other way, and the cameras were too far away, and the room was too big, and the sound was too quiet to travel without the gap at the bottom of the door. And I remember thinking this, I thought, she doesn't know that I know. She doesn't know that I heard any of this. The sip of water at the wrong moment, the smile that came late, the name, the fingernails digging into skin, none of it. She thinks she's in that room alone with him, and the cameras, and the microphones, and the press. and she thinks the only record of what's happening is the one being made by the equipment in the main room, and she doesn't know that I'm in the next room with my headphones on, and the door closed, and the gap at the bottom letting everything through. She doesn't know that someone is watching her fall apart in real time, and there's nothing she can do to stop it because she doesn't know I'm there. I heard the exchange continue for a few more minutes. I heard the rhythm change. I heard her voice more and more, filling the space, doing the work of someone who is holding ground they are not going to keep, someone who is defending a position they have already lost, someone who is throwing everything they have at a problem that has already been solved. And I heard his voice, calm and steady, not doing work, just being what he was. The way a river is a river, the way a mountain is a mountain. And I thought about the question I was asked that morning, the one about whether the microphones would pick up everything. And I thought about the door that was supposed to be closed and the gap at the bottom and all the things that were not supposed to happen but were happening anyway. And I thought about the name he said, and the way she stopped when she heard it, and the way her fingernails sounded against her skin. And then I heard something I will never forget. Something that I have replayed in my head more times than I can count. Something that comes back to me when I'm trying to sleep, or when I'm in a quiet room, or when I smell burned coffee and feel myself being pulled back to that morning. He said something at the end, after the formal exchange was over, after the cameras stopped rolling, after the room started to move and the voices started to fade. He said something to her, quietly, a sentence. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard enough. I heard enough to know that what he said was not a goodbye, it was not a pleasantry, it was not anything you would say to someone you had just finished a formal exchange with and were now moving on from. It was something else, something that meant something I couldn't quite reach. Something that sat in the air between them like the name had sat in the air between them earlier. Something that only the two of them knew the meaning of, and now I knew it too. I was one of the 3 people in the world who knew what those words meant in that room at that moment. And then I heard her stand up, the sound of her chair scraping back, the sound of her footsteps going toward the door, and I heard the door in the main room open, and I heard her leave. I was still in the green room. I was still in my chair. My headphones were still on, and I was thinking about the name he said and the sentence at the end and the sip of water at the wrong moment and the smile that came late and the fingernails digging into skin. I was thinking about all of it, and I was thinking about how none of it was on the record. None of it was in the audio feeds I was monitoring. The microphones in the main room had captured the formal exchange, the words that were meant to be captured, the things that were supposed to be said and recorded and broadcast and remembered. But they hadn't captured this. This was only in the green room, only through the door with the gap at the bottom, only in my headphones, only in the space between what was supposed to happen and what actually happened. I almost stopped the story here. I almost said that's it, that's what I heard, the name and the sentence and the footsteps going out the door and then silence and then the sound of the room emptying out. But I need to tell you the rest. I need to tell you what happened after she left. Because this is where it gets complicated, and this is where the story changes, and this is the part I have been holding on to for years. The part I have not told anyone. The part I need to tell you now, because if I don't tell you now, I will never tell anyone, and this thing will stay inside me forever and I can't carry it anymore. I went into the main room. I had to. My shift wasn't over and I had work to do and the session was ending and people were starting to move around and I needed to collect my equipment and pack up and get ready to leave. So I walked through the door from the green room into the main room, and I saw the table and the chairs and the cameras and the press and all the things that were there during the session. And I saw the space where she had been sitting. The chair was pushed back. The water glass was still there, half full, sitting on the table where she had left it. And I saw him. He was still there. He was standing near the table, talking to a staff person, and he looked calm, the way he had sounded calm through the door, the way his voice had been calm the whole time. And as I was walking past, carrying my equipment case, he looked at me. Just for a second, just a glance. And he said something, to me, not to the staff person, to me. A sentence, quiet, calm, the kind of sentence you say to someone you don't know when you want to let them know that you see them, that you know they were there, that you appreciate what they do even though they are low on the ladder and no one ever thanks them for it. The kind of sentence that makes a person feel seen, for just a moment in a day when they haven't been seen by anyone. He said, I know you heard it. And he looked away. He went back to his conversation with the staff person, and I stood there with my equipment case in my hand, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if he was telling me that he knew I had heard the name or the sentence or the sip of water at the wrong moment or the fingernails digging into skin. I didn't know which one he meant. I didn't know if he meant all of them. I didn't know if he was thanking me for staying quiet or warning me to stay quiet, or just letting me know that he knew what had happened in the green room while the session was going on, that he knew about the door and the gap and the headphones and all of it. I didn't know, I still don't know, but I know that he said it. I know that he looked at me and he said those words and he meant something by them, and only the two of us know what that something was. And I have been carrying that moment for years, the moment when he looked at me and said those words, and I stood there in the main room with my equipment case and my headphones around my neck. And I didn't know what to do and I didn't say anything back, and I just stood there like I didn't understand what he was saying even though I understood perfectly. And then I walked out of the building, and I got in my car, and I sat there with the engine off in the parking garage, and I couldn't drive because I didn't know what had just happened. I'm still in the parking garage. You probably noticed I said I was in my car, and I'm still here. I've been sitting here for a long time, longer than I meant to, and the coffee smell is gone now. I'm too far from the building, too far from the urn in the corner of the green room, but I can still feel it, the memory of it, the way it sits in the back of my throat like the memory of something I drank a long time ago. And I need to tell you the last part because this is the reason I called you. This is the reason I asked you to listen. I could have told you this over the phone. I could have sent you a message. I didn't. I wanted to be in the same space as you when I said this because it matters, and I needed it to matter to someone other than me. I needed to say it out loud to another person and see their face while I said it and know that it was real and that someone else had heard it and that it wasn't just something I had made up in a green room while monitoring audio feeds and listening to sounds bleed through a door. Here's what I need to tell you. I sent a message that night after I drove home and sat in my apartment and tried to figure out what had happened. After I replayed everything in my head 100 times and still couldn't make it fit together. I sent a message to someone I shouldn't have sent it to. Someone who was in the building that day but who wasn't supposed to know what I heard. Someone who might have been part of what I heard but who I wasn't sure about. Someone I thought I could trust but who I didn't really know at all. I sent them a message, just a few words, just enough to let them know that I had heard something and that I knew something and that I was thinking about it. Just enough to start a conversation I shouldn't have started. They never responded. I never sent another message. I never mentioned it again. I just let it sit there, the message I sent, the words I put out into the world when I shouldn't have, the thing I did that I can't take back. And I've been thinking about that message ever since. I've been thinking about what would have happened if they had responded, if they had asked me what I heard, if they had wanted to know, if they had been angry or scared or grateful or anything at all. If they had told me to keep quiet or told me to go public or told me I was wrong about all of it. But they didn't respond. And I didn't ask again. And the message is still there in some inbox somewhere, a message I sent that I should not have sent, a message that proves that I didn't keep it to myself even though I told myself I was keeping it to myself. I told someone, even if they never answered, I told someone, and I have never been able to forgive myself for that. That's my confession, not the whole story. The whole story is what I've already told you. This is my confession. I was in the green room. I heard the sip of water at the wrong moment. I heard the smile that came late. I heard the name that landed like a stone in water. I heard the sentence at the end. I heard the fingernails digging into skin. I heard her leave. I heard him say, "I know you heard it." I heard all of it. I was the only person in the world who heard all of it. And I sent a message to someone that I should not have sent, and they never responded, and I have never told anyone any of this until right now. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Maybe because someone asked me, finally, someone who wanted to know what really happened, and I realized that I had been holding on to it like it was something fragile, like if I let it go it would stop being real. But it's not fragile. It's the truest thing I know. It happened. I was there. I heard it. And now you know too. And I need you to know that I have never been the same since. I have never walked into a green room without thinking about that morning. I have never smelled burned coffee without feeling myself being pulled back to that chair with my headphones on and the door closed and the gap at the bottom letting everything through. I have never been the same, and I will never be the same. And this is the first time I have said that out loud to another person, and I need you to know that it is not a performance. It is not something I am saying because it sounds good or because it makes the story better. It is the truth. It is the most honest thing I have ever said. And now it's out there in the space between us, and I can't take it back, and I don't want to take it back, and I don't know what happens next, but I know I had to say it. I had to say all of it, for the first time, to someone who would listen.